Welcome, everybody, to the Grilling Truths Indianapolis Colts Weekly Show. I am your host, Cole Hanna, and today we are going to be previewing a pretty big upcoming game here for Indianapolis. They will be on Thursday Night Football this week, taking on the Houston Texans down in Houston. Two teams tied atop the AFC South at 6-4, battle to see who will take control of the division, and it should be a good one. And unfortunately for Indianapolis, knowing that they have to go on the road for Thursday Night Football with a short week, they have a ton of injuries that we need to go over really quick. Marlon Mack was the big one coming out of the Jacksonville game. He goes 14 carries for 109 yards and a touchdown in that game, but his day was ended early with a broken hand. He had surgery to repair that hand today. He will be out at least for the next couple of weeks, and he'll be reevaluated later on in the season. But that's a big blow for an Indianapolis Colts rushing attack that the Colts really, really wanted to rely on. Now, on the bright side for Indianapolis, they do have Jonathan Williams, who really kind of had his breakout party in the NFL last week. With Marlon Mack going down with the hand injury, Jordan Wilkins, Mack's normal backup, was also out of the game against Jacksonville, though he should be back for Houston. But Jonathan Williams is the guy who got the call, and he delivered. I mean, he goes 13 carries, 116 yards for the game, and ended up with actually a higher yards per carry average than Marlon Mack. Marlon Mack at 7.8. Jonathan Williams goes for 8.9, and Williams did break off a 48-yard run in the game. And I thought he showed a lot of quickness, a lot of burst. He was, I thought, a very patient runner. And I think he showed really a lot of talent, a lot of good running back instincts. I think if you're Indianapolis, I think you have a great offensive line, and you have so many talented players up front, whether it be Quentin Nelson or Anthony Costanzo, Ryan Kelly. I mean, so many of those guys, they can clear, they can open holes. And Marlon Mack was very, very good at being patient, letting those holes develop, and then hitting the hole. But Jonathan Williams, I think, showed similar good instincts, patience as a runner. So with Williams and likely Jordan Wilkins coming back next week and being your running back tandem, you should still feel pretty good. Both of those guys have had success when called upon this season. Next, we should probably move on to the wide receivers, where the Colts have been pretty much, unfortunately, banged up all year long. T.Y. Hilton, Paris Campbell, and Devin Funchess all missing Indianapolis' last game against Jacksonville. The good news on that front is T.Y. Hilton seems to be a legitimate possibility to return against Houston. And if there's any team you want T.Y. Hilton to return against, it is Houston. He's had a ton of success against Houston throughout his career. They've never been able to really limit him or slow him down. So a return against Houston would just seem to be fitting, wouldn't it, for T.Y. Hilton's career. But he could return for the first time in a few weeks. And Devin Funchess as well seems to be a guy that could be making his return to the NFL against Houston. He got injured in the Week 1 game with a broken collarbone against the Chargers. He has not played since. He has returned to practice. He returned to practice last week, but had not been cleared by the Indianapolis Colts training staff because the bone, essentially he had said he is waiting on the bone to fully heal. As soon as that does, he'll get to go and he'll be ready to go. That could come this week. We'll have to monitor that situation. If it doesn't happen against Houston, I would expect he would be ready to go the following week. Now, on to the Indianapolis Colts defense. We have another injury to talk about there, unfortunately. Talented rookie safety, Kerry Willis, who's really kind of turned some heads in Indianapolis. You know, in the preseason, he was not part of their safety rotation, but he really kind of shined in the injury to Malik Hooker and Clayton Geathers and earned himself a spot in this rotation. However, he had developed some concussion-like symptoms following Indianapolis' 33-13 win over Jacksonville, and he will also be out against Houston. But Houston has their own injury issues to worry about. J.J. Watt, who's for a long time been arguably the best defensive player in the NFL, he will be out in this game as well. He's done for the year. So I guess we can go ahead and jump into this one. Two teams really coming off polar opposite performances. Indianapolis had been a team that kind of makes you, they make you worry going into that fourth quarter. Every single game of the season had been decided by 7 points or less. But then we get into this game, and Indianapolis rolled over Jacksonville. They won 33-13 behind their dominant running game. Carried the ball 36 times for 264 yards, 3 touchdowns in the ground game. Jacoby Brissett did not have to do a whole lot himself. He goes just 15 of 24, 148 yards, a touchdown, and an interception. And the Indianapolis Colts defense was outstanding as well. Well, in Jacksonville, just 13 points. And Jacksonville really kind of racked up a lot of yards and pretty much garbage time as the game was pretty much already in hand. They did score on that last drive of the game. Now, when we move over to Houston, it was pretty much a polar opposite performance. Houston lost to Baltimore last week. Baltimore, who could be probably the hottest team in the NFL, they look very, very good, but they absolutely dismantled Houston and Baltimore. They win 41-7. Deshaun Watson couldn't get it going all day. He goes 18 of 29, 169 yards, 0 touchdowns, and a pick. The run game for Houston was pretty impressive, though. Carlos Hyde goes 9 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown. Duke Johnson was impressive as well. He goes 6 carries for 40 yards in that game. That was pretty much the only thing that went well for Houston, but what really went bad for Houston was that defense. That defense really struggled against Lamar Jackson, who was looking like the MVP favorite in the NFL. And Deshaun Watson was a guy coming in this game with some MVP hype of his own, but Lamar Jackson was far and away the best quarterback in this matchup. Lamar Jackson goes 17 of 24, 222 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also added 9 carries for 86 yards on the ground. Gus Edwards got involved in the ground game as well. He goes 8 carries for 112 yards and a touchdown. That's a hell of a day at the office for him. Mark Ingram adds 13 carries for 48 yards on the ground as well. And Baltimore as a team goes 36 carries for 263 yards and a touchdown on the ground. That ground game was really just pounding Houston, and they couldn't find a way to stop it. And traditionally, so far this season, that's been a pretty good Houston run defense, but against Baltimore, they just didn't have it in them. And that sets up a huge clash between the Colts and the Texans. And the Texans, I think, are a tough team to figure out, and I think Indianapolis as well. I think both teams have looked very, very good at times, but they both have a bit of head-scratching losses. I'm not surprised Houston dropped that game to Baltimore. I think Baltimore is the hottest team in the NFL, and not just because of what they did to Houston. You know, they have wins over New England and Seattle in the last few weeks as well. So they're playing some really, really good football. But to get dismantled as badly as they did, 41-7, to only manage 7 points, you know, with a guy like Deshaun Watson, a quarterback that had been getting some MVP love, that surprised me. So I guess the question is going to be, which Houston are we going to see? Are we going to see the team that got dismantled 41-7? Or are we going to see the team that took it to Jacksonville the week before, just like Indianapolis did? You know, before that Baltimore game, Houston was coming off a 26-3 victory over Jacksonville. They'd beaten Oakland the week before that, 27-24. And that's an Oakland team that's playing some pretty good football in their own right as well. They're in the playoff conversation in the AFC. So it will be very tough to figure out, you know, which Houston team is going to show up. But I think the big thing for Houston is not just which team's going to show up, but can they find a consistent pass rush? When you lose a guy like J.J. Watt, and they traded, you know, their other significant pass rusher to Seattle earlier in the season, you know, you've got to find someone that can step up and really kind of generate some pressure on the quarterback. And that's been J.J. Watt for so long. He's been pretty much undisputably the best pass rusher in the NFL for weeks, for years. I mean, that's been the go-to guy. And then Jadeveon Clowney had kind of been the guy that you kind of hope could complement him on the other side and really give you a double-headed monster. That never really worked out. And Jadeveon Clowney has now been traded to Seattle. So you've really got to find your way to find someone that can get after the quarterback. And with J.J. Watt down, there's been no one's been able to do that. And I mean, J.J. Watt has a pass rush – the Houston Texans have a pass rush win rate of just 29% since J.J. Watt has been down. That would rank 31st in the NFL, only ahead of the Detroit Lions. So this team has not been able to get after the quarterback at all. And when you're playing a team like Indianapolis, who, you know, on the flip side of that, has a very, very good offensive line. I think the offensive line has been down in recent weeks. It started off the season so dominant. And they were really that team that you could just, you know, in the trenches, offensively at least, in the trenches, they were going to win. You know, that they were looking like, if not the best offensive line in the NFL, they were certainly in the conversation. They kind of struggled in losses to Pittsburgh, struggled in losses to Miami, and even a close win over Denver. You know, they had some offensive line troubles in that game as well. They finally got back on track against Jacksonville, and you can see that with the rushing stats. But, you know, the Indianapolis Colts offensive line is not going to be an easy offensive line to get back on track when it comes to rushing the passer. So that's going to be, I think, a huge, huge question mark in this game. Can Indianapolis give Jacoby Brissett the time he needs to go through his progressions, pick apart this Houston defense, just like he did the last time these two teams played. Probably Jacoby Brissett's best game of his career. I mean, and that Week 7 victory over Houston, Jacoby Brissett went 26 of 39, 326 yards, and 4 touchdowns in that game. Hands down, hit the best game of his career. Can he repeat that? And I think for Indianapolis, the key for this game is, just run the football. I think when we've seen this team at their best, what they did against Jacksonville, what they did against Kansas City, right? They were able to ground and pound that ball with their, talented stable of running backs and behind that talented offensive line they have. The Colts have had a lot of injuries this season. They've had a lot of injuries. Guys in the passing game have been taken out, whether that's wide receivers, whether that's Jacoby Brissett himself. They've had a lot of injuries in that passing game that have kind of derailed at times. The one unit that's been healthy all year long is that Indianapolis Colts offensive line. That offensive line has been healthy, and they've been playing good football. I think if you're Indianapolis, what you want to do is control the flow of this game. You want to dominate up front in the trenches, and when they've been able to do that, they've been a very, very tough team to defeat. And coming off a game like Jacksonville, you've got some confidence in that offensive line when you run for over 200 yards. When you have 2 different running backs go for over 100 yards rushing the game, you're going to want to rely on that offensive line, rely on that running game. Take the pressure off Jacoby Brissett. Don't make this be a Jacoby Brissett game. Don't make Jacoby Brissett win this game with his arm. Don't make him carry this offense. Give him that, this, and not just him, but this entire offense, that dual threat option that we could throw. We can also run the football when we need to. So I think if Indianapolis can do that, they'll be in pretty good shape. I think playing at Houston is going to be tough, but it's a rivalry game. This is really in the last few years. These teams have oftentimes been competing for an AFC South crown. This Indianapolis went to Houston last season in the playoffs and knocked them out. So they've always been, kind of rivals. And to see these two teams playing for what, very well could end up being to decide who goes to the playoffs from the AFC South this season. Now, both teams are, whoever loses this is still going to be in the conversation for the wild card. They're still going to be in the conversation for the AFC South as well, but it'll just put them behind the 8 ball a little bit. So it's a huge, huge game from that standpoint as well. And I guess the last thing we want to talk about, I think, in this game, before we hop off the air here, is, I think the big thing is going to be, how does Deshaun Watson look? This is going to be his second game against Indianapolis, and he's been talked about as an MVP candidate. This is a guy that, I think a lot of people talk about as one of the top 2 or 3 young quarterbacks we have in the NFL today. And I think when you look back at what Deshaun Watson did against Indianapolis, his stats don't look bad. He was 22 of 34, 308 yards, one touchdown, to 2 interceptions. Those aren't horrible stats. But I think you could definitely tell if you watched that game, the Houston offense kind of looked out of sync at times. Deshaun Watson was missing some key throws, whether that be turnovers or just missing the open man. He just didn't look like his normal self against Indianapolis. And I think that's credit to the Indianapolis defensive line. They got pressure on Deshaun Watson that game, sacked him 3 times, forced him into 2 interceptions. And I think it's also credit to the secondary and Pierre Desir, who Indianapolis has always kind of shadowed DeAndre Hopkins with Desir, and he's done a great job of doing that. I mean, he's always been one of the, I think, best corners in the NFL at covering DeAndre Hopkins. And, that's another guy, unfortunately for the Indianapolis Colts, seemingly never-ending injury list. Pierre Desir is another guy that's going to be questionable in that game. So I think you have a situation where Deshaun Watson can have success, with Desir possibly being out due to an injury, with the other Colts rookie corner, Rock Ya-Sin, one of their starting corners, also leaving that game last week with an ankle injury, with rookie safety Kerry Willis already being declared out of this game. There's going to be a banged-up secondary for Indianapolis. Deshaun Watson, this is a game where he has to perform the biggest stage. You're trying to get your team into the playoffs. This is a guy being talked about as an MVP candidate. How he does, I think, in this game is going to be very, very interesting to watch. If you're going to be an MVP candidate, if you're going to be one of the up-and-coming stars of the NFL, you have to perform on the highest stage. And 2 6-4 teams sitting at the top of the division, a game to see who's going to take control of that division, that's the biggest stage possible for Deshaun Watson outside of the playoffs, essentially. So this is a game he needs to deliver in. At the same time, it's an Indianapolis Colts defense that I think has played some really, really good football in recent weeks. I thought they played really well against Miami. I thought some offensive blunders and some turnovers cost you that game. I think they played very, very well against Jacksonville with Nick Foles back. I thought they played a great defensive game. And Pittsburgh was a little bit iffy, I'll grant you that. But in the last couple weeks, I think they've played some really, really good football. I think Darius Leonard has hit his stride. He's playing well. And I think the Colts' entire defense is playing well. Justin Houston seems to be getting a sack in almost every game now. He's playing some good football. So it should be a very, very interesting matchup. If I had to predict it, I just think Indianapolis is the more balanced football team. I think they are, I think even without Marlon Mack, they have such a great offensive line. They can run the ball if they need to. And I think they can give Jacoby Brissett time to kind of sit back and go through his progressions when the Colts need to throw the football. And I think if they can get T.Y. Hilton back or Devin Funchess back, kind of start to get their normal starting guys, rotate them back into the wide receiver rotation, I just think the Colts are too balanced. I think, I would feel more confident in Houston if I knew they could get after the quarterback, if I knew their defensive line was going to be up to par. But without J.J. Watt, and when you play an offensive line like this for Indianapolis, I just think you have some pass rush struggles. Clearly, you have some stopping the run troubles for Houston after what we saw against Baltimore. And this is not the offensive line you want to be playing when you're trying to figure out those issues. So I think Indianapolis is too balanced offensively, and I think the defense is playing some very, very good football. And despite the injuries, two banged-up teams, I'm going to go Indianapolis wins this one 27-20 in Houston. I think they'll take control of the AFC South. And if the Colts win this, that would be 2 wins over Houston so far this season. They would have the tiebreaker over Houston. So it's a huge game. Houston's trying to, start going to the second and third tiebreakers because, Indianapolis has already secured one victory. If Indianapolis wins, no matter what happens, they'll have the tiebreaker over Houston and a 1-game lead in the AFC South. So thank you for listening, guys, to the Indianapolis Colts Weekly Show on The Grueling Truth. We will be back with you next week to preview the Tennessee Titans game. We'll also recap what happened in the Houston game on Thursday Night Football and hopefully recapping an Indianapolis Colts victory, but we'll see how it goes. So thank you for listening, everybody. I'm your host, Cole Hanna, and come check us out next week.